All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for a Community Development Exchange, a webinar series at the University of Minnesota Extension, a Community Development Department. My name is Brandon Hofstad, and I'm the Community Economics Program Leader with the University of Minnesota Extension. And it is my pleasure to kick off today's webinar, Building Community Prosperity for the Next Generation. And as per usual, a few housekeeping rules before we begin. This webinar is being recorded, and you can find final video on our website. I'll post that in just a second, where you'll be able to find that when it's up and ready. Also, if you would need closed captioning, you can find that at the bottom, so please feel free to enable that. As a friendly reminder, we are using meetings, so we can see everyone on there and we can hear everyone, so please be sure to mute your microphones when you're not speaking. If you have comments or questions during the presentation, you can use the comment to either send it to the entire folks, so for everyone to see, or you can send a private chat to either myself. Again, my name is Brandon Hofstad, or my colleague Aidan Opitz, you'll meet in just a short bit here. And with that, today's webinar includes a panel of presenters, and we have two from the University of Minnesota Extension, and then also two from the Minnesota Council on Foundations. And I'll start with our Minnesota Extension folks. So first up is Ben Winchester. Ben is a rural sociologist and evaluation specialist with the University of Minnesota Extension. Ben conducts applied research on economic, social, and demographic topics surrounding the theme of rewriting rural narrative and has been doing work on the transfer of wealth over the last several years. Ben will be joined by Aidan Opitz. Aidan is a community economics regional educator with the University of Minnesota Extension. Aidan covers the southeast corner of the state and specializes in economic impact analysis as well as generational transfer of wealth forecasting. And then we are very honored to have two folks from the Minnesota Council on Foundations. First is Jill Chi. Jill is the member engagement manager with the Minnesota Council on Foundations, and she has over 10 years of experience working with knowledge management and communication in various governmental agencies, educational institutions, and nonprofit organizations, and supports the development of the Minnesota State Share Transfer of Wealth program in collaboration with Minnesota's philanthropic community. And then last but not least, we have Michelle Marins, and Michelle is the president of MCF and works to connect, strengthen, and mobilize the power of philanthropy to advance prosperity and equity. And prior to her work with MCF, Michelle led advocacy and communication efforts at the Women's Foundation of Minnesota. So today, our presenters, first we'll start off with Ben and Aidan, and they will have an exclusive preview of the 2025 Minnesota Transfer of Wealth Study Update. And then we will turn it over to Jill and Michelle, who will share programs from the Minnesota Council on Foundations and a review of the Minnesota State Share Campaign to help prepare Minnesota philanthropic sector to capture the transfer of wealth opportunity. So with that, there will be opportunities for questions, so please hold those or drop those in, and we will do that during the Q&A section later in the program. So with that, Ben and team, the floor is yours.
Hey, thanks, Brandon. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. A happy Monday. My name is Ben Winchester. I'm a rural sociologist with the University of Minnesota Extension. I think you know Extension is the 4-H folks. We're in a different area of Extension called the Department of Community Development. And we've got some specialties around community economic development, tourism, and community leadership and civic engagement activities. And so part of this work that we're going to talk about here today is the transfer of wealth. And we've been doing these studies for a couple of years now, probably three years. There was a group that had been doing these studies nationally for over 20 years. And we're going to be picking up on some of that work there. And for now, I'm going to kind of share some of the data that we've got around the transfer of wealth, about what it is, kind of the changes we're seeing in the past 3 years. And then Aidan will talk about what this data means for 2025 moving forward. So what is the transfer of wealth? In summary, it's just the amount of wealth that's going to transfer from one generation to the next. And really over the past 20 years, there's been a lot more attention paid to this, as the baby boom generation, right, is a huge generation. And they really, especially in our rural communities, which we'll talk about in a second, have led to the grain of rural. And I think part of the arguments made around this transfer of wealth is that what happens then if our older folks pass away and our kids don't live in our small towns anymore, right? That wealth that was generated in our towns, with our communities, passes away out of town, right? Their kids may live in a different city or different state, and really the town doesn't benefit from this anymore. So we do want to talk about that conversation that can be had about what does this wealth mean for my town? How do we re-examine what we have in town through this wealth lens? So there have been concepts, strategies, and measures through this rural wealth creation that John Pender at Economic Research Service led, and this really tried to form some data, some research around what is that number, right? We have an idea that people have wealth, but what is that really composed of? And how can we measure it? And especially in rural communities, what does it mean when people hold land, right? And what are the contributions of land? What are the contributions of recreational properties? So we have a lot of different rurals across the state too when we talk about this wealth creation. And so there has been a lot of attention paid to this wealth transfer. 2018, there was a large article in the Chronicle of Philanthropy that talked about these windfall years, and that 11.8 trillion was going to transfer over this 10-year time period. And then really advancing a conversation around how can local charities, how can statewide charities tap into this wealth and talk about activating the local community. So we do know that wealth includes certain key data points, right? Savings and checkings account. That's a key data point there. People think about life insurance policies also hold value in them. Residential real estate, you own a home. Some people have land. But we also have retirement accounts, private, public retirement accounts that contribute to our household and individual wealth. But we also have business wealth that's held by individuals. And that might be a private company that we own privately. It might be a public company that we own stock in. Either way, these are assets that are held by individuals. So what we have access to is a data set that gives us the number. How much wealth is held in these different categories by individuals at different, jurisdictional levels, I'll say. And the most common one that we use is the county level. And so we wanted to develop some measure for our communities and our counties to better understand what is wealth, what does it look like, and how does it change and vary across our communities. So when we look at this Economic Research Service report, this put out by the U.S. Census Bureau that looks at, what type of wealth do people hold? Like 32% of individual wealth is held in retirement accounts. Another 31% is equity, almost equal over the past really 10 years. This has been very stable. Stocks and mutual funds make up 11% of an individual common wealth, and then we have assets at financial institutions too. You might have other asset holdings, but you have assets, right? And now these assets are offset by debts. Now, debts may be outweighing your assets when you're a younger person, right? Younger people have student loans. You don't have a lot of assets, but you have high debt. And those tend to be a negative asset holder, right? 20 to 30-year-olds tend to be negative asset holders. But as you approach middle age and age, you start to solidify in the components of wealth that you hold. So when we look at the study that we had done initially, so 3 years ago, the group that normally had done these studies in the past was getting out of it. Sorry, do you see my picture in the corner? I want to keep my picture in there. I don't think so, right? I don't think I actually set that up this way. I'm going to reshare this. I think it's important. I want to keep me kind of in here. So I want to talk about like the study that we had done a couple years ago was really building upon a model that had been done in the past. So Don Mackey and Deb Markley were part of this group called Locus Impact Investing, and they did these studies like all across the country. Almost half of the states in the country have done transfer wealth studies. And we're going to talk about what they've done with them in a minute. But really, what do these transfer wealth studies show? Number one, when we updated our study here in Minnesota, the very first one we did looked at the time period from 2020 to 2070. And what did we use? We used 2021 data and looked back a year and then projected forward. This is kind of mechanical, but it's going to become important for when we look at the changes coming up here in a minute. When we did our initial study, like 2020 to 2070, it showed Minnesotans held 2.19 trillion in net worth. And that was in 2020, total in all of our households, right? And then when you look forward at the number of people that are going to be passing away over 10 years, we show that from 2020 to 2030, over 61 billion of wealth was going to transfer from one generation to the next as these individuals pass away. Folks, you have to talk about death here. This is the sad reality of change, right? But it's also at a community level about continuity. Like we have had people that raise their families in our towns, but we want our towns to be around for the next generation too. So trying to make the argument that when we do succession planning, we can succeed our communities using maybe some of the wealth that we created here. So again, trying to categorize what do these numbers mean? And they're actually quite large numbers, right? And even in our most rural communities, you've got millions of dollars in wealth that's held across our communities. So when we had done these studies early on, it was using a model from 2020 to 2070. But now we wanted to update the data, and we did. So that's part of the mission here today, is not just to like show off the old report and what transfer of wealth is, but to look at, all right, we're gonna shift our internal model in extension from 2021 data to 2024 data. And we want to share with you what we have found in some of these changes in wealth holding. But we also want to look at this through kind of a rural lens. And why is that? It's because a larger proportion of our individuals, of our residents in rural communities are older. We have a higher proportion of people over the age of 65. So this aging trend really happens across our rural communities first and is happening right now in our rural communities. So it happens first, right? The baby boomer generation is moving its way through the snake, the demographic snake, right? Well, they're kind of moving quicker in our rural areas first. And then behind them are the metropolitan areas. And we'll see what this means. So we're going to have a little distinct eye toward rural and urban places. And so one of the things that we're going to use, and this is just so you know, there's a data point out here called the Rural Urban Continuum Code, where counties can be classified from from urban to rural, from metropolitan to not metropolitan. And so this allows, and we've got this nationally, this is very common amongst rural researchers because it allows you to look at differentials between counties, right? And between types of counties. You can have micropolitan areas. You can have metropolitan areas, right? Categories 1, 2, and 3 tend to be in metro. Categories 4 through 9 are considered more non-metro, or another exchange, especially on the bottom end, would be the most rural places, are found in these upper end continuum codes. So what did we find? From 2021 to 2024, the wealth across the state of Minnesota went up by 38%. And if that sounds big, it is, right? A 38% increase over a 3-year time period is alarming, but it also makes sense. We have a context behind this. We have an inflationary time period. We have post-COVID. We have a lot of different trends playing upon the increase in wealth measurement. Now, so that's one thing. One side, state increased by 38%. But when you break it down by the metropolitan versus non-metro, or again, urban to rural, we find in the most urban places, again, those are Anoka, Ramsey, the core 7-county metro area, their wealth went up by 27%. But in the most rural counties, their wealth went up by 70, 80%. And so this became an interesting data point for us to look at the distribution of wealth across the state. Like we saw growth in our rural communities exceeding that in the most urban communities. And when we look at the distribution of wealth across the entire state, we can see that more wealth is held by our rural communities. We're sharing this wealth across the state. So in 2021, 73.4% of all the wealth in the state was held in, RUC's Code 1. The rural, or RUC is our short term, RUCC, our RUC Code 1, right? These are counties in metro, and you see which counties they are there. So 73% of the wealth was held there, but now, 3 years later, it's just 67%. Why? It's because a greater proportion of the wealth is being held across rural and greater Minnesota. So now we start to see other averages. And of course, like our rural communities don't have the high average net worth that folks in the metropolitan areas have. But now we saw the gains in average household net worth exceeding that in the metropolitan areas across our rural communities. FYI, we're going to share this PowerPoint with you. If you feel like you need to take a picture or take notes or anything, like we're for sure going to be sending this out right after here. So again, this is very interesting to look at in terms of like where this distribution of wealth is held. So now I kind of get back to like looking at like you remember those components of wealth from that chart earlier? Like what happened to retirement accounts over the 3-year time period? Right? They went up by 30, the Dow Jones went up by 37%. The S&P returned 57% in the 3-year time period. So, and again, what are the components of wealth and what have been their patterns over the past 3 years? Equity in one's own home, 44% increase in wealth. Retirement accounts, 33% increase in these retirement account valuations over just 3 years. So one of the pieces that we immediately think of when it comes to rural Minnesota is the valuation of land, and that is the contributions at agricultural land, and not just agricultural, but recreational properties make to the contributions of wealth holding in our rural communities. So there is a data point here. Department of Revenue does provide estimated market value of all the property in a county. And so what we've got here is the estimated market value of property in Minnesota went up by 35% over the same time period, right? 35% increase. And what was that gain in the most metropolitan area? 30% and a 52% increase in the most non-metropolitan area. So again, the most rural counties, Aiken, all the way through Yellow Medicine and holding 50% increases in wealth or in land valuations, estimated market value of property. Sorry, I don't want to get the terminology wrong. This is estimated market value of property, which includes land, the structures, can be ag land, can be recreational property, commercial property. All of those pieces are included in this. So then we thought, all right, what proportion of all the wealth that was grown in these different Rux code was due to land or due to this estimated market value property, right? So now we saw the total net worth change across the state was $835 trillion from 2021 to 24, and 283 trillion was growing in our estimated market value. So in one way, we could say that 34% of all the wealth that was growing in the state happened due to estimated market valuation increases. Now, if you break this down in the most urban places, we see, what proportion or what percent of the gains in wealth was due to property valuations, 33% in the metropolitan areas. But now in the most rural places, you're getting more than half, and now up to almost three-quarters of the most non-metropolitan counties. So an attribution of their wealth creation due to local property valuation increases. Now, there's a caveat here. Not all of those property, not all of this estimated market value that's held in these codes are actually their wealth anymore. And what I mean by that is this. So here's a map across the country of recreational properties, right? So like Aiken County, I don't know if there's anybody from Aiken County here, but Aiken County, 51 to 54% of all your houses and all your properties are seasonal properties, meaning it's recreational. They're there during the summer or, periodically. But the point is, in our data, wealth is measured where it's owned. So if I live in Stearns County and I own property up in Aiken County, that wealth is measured where I live in Stearns County. This is no longer considered Aiken County's wealth because it's no longer locally owned. You cannot now have local labor live there, local kids live there. I mean, there's a whole different avenue to talk about that parcel, about extra local ownership. And not to dissuade you from thinking that this doesn't count as wealth, but it's not counted in your community anymore. Because think about this. If I own property up in Aiken County, but I don't live there, and the property valuations go up, I can leverage that. I can take out a loan against the valuation increases that I see on that property. But nobody locally can. Like the only benefits you have locally for these recreational properties are an increased property tax valuation, right? You get some more taxes roughly. So part of this is to explain to folks on our end what it means for the level of community. What does this mean when you look at your community? Who owns the wealth in your community? Like we used to have a hardware store that was locally owned, and now you might have an extra locally owned, big box group that owns a small retail establishment. That's no longer a wealth generator either. So there are lots of different ways to think about this. We're not going to get in depth today in terms of how to exemplify this as a community wealth model. So that is the avenue that we've got looking forward. But for now, we've got the new, so these have been the shifts that we saw from 21 to 2024. And now Aiden's going to step in and we've got an update here. We've got a new report that'll be on our website next week. And now our updated report shows 2025 to 2065. Our previous report was 2020 to 2070, and it was a 50-year time frame. We thought 50 years was too big. So we've shortened our time frame and moved our time period up 5 years. So that Z link right here, and we'll share this in the notes too, contains a link right to our intergenerational transfer of wealth studies, which includes all of our studies, links to different programs across the country. But Aiden, I'd like to have you step in here and tell us what you found in these results.
Sounds good. Will do. Hello again. My name is Aiden Opatz. I'm the lead analyst for this program or this project. And so I believe it was touched on earlier, but for context, when we use the 2021 data for the 2020 model, we're now forecasting forward. So we're using 2024 data um, to create the 2025 model. So first, we start with population and estimated population growth. So what we see in Minnesota is this steady population growth, which means generally what we have found that the wealth in the state is going to grow. What we also see is the average net worth projections by age increasing. So what you see at the very bottom, actually what you don't see at the very bottom, is the smallest under 25 wealth. And then my age category, the 25 to 34 wealth, is just about a pixel at the very bottom. So we're really focusing on this age. And it's not necessarily just like the wealth is growing, but the people within an age category is changing. So the millennials are a large age category amongst themselves, and so you're seeing that as they're aging, you're seeing that grow alongside their wealth, and then as the boomers is the other large generation, and you see that and closer towards the ends or closer in the middle, like 2040, 2045, that's when they're um, getting into that highest age category, and that's when you start seeing this growth in the highest age category.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in here too. One of the things that we see in the data is like you do see wealth accumulate and grow up until a certain point. And then after like the age of 75 or so, it really gets eaten into by the medical industry because individual wealth does go down at the end of life. And you start to see that in the data here too.
Yeah, exactly. You see that the 65 to 74 is the largest wealth category, usually. So there's this phenomena that we see in Minnesota as well as rural communities across the United States, but there's this graying of rural, where rural communities are becoming older and older on average. And again, this is not just for Minnesota rural communities, this is also for rural communities across the nation. And so when we're talking about the largest uh, generations, i.e., the baby boomers, right now in the so they were born 1946 to 1964, and when we reach 2040, we see them that they're going to be 76 to 94, and that's when we start seeing this peak in the age or in the highest age category. Later on, in 2065, that's again, we're starting to see this slope outwards. And again, that is the millennial generation. And so we're seeing these population trends. And so what we like to say is the time for planning is right. The best time for planning was yesterday, but the time for planning is now. We want to get 10-year plans before 2030. So when we get to this peak in the oldest population category, there's plans in place. So what we're looking at in the top is that is our old model. So in 2020, we estimated that there was $2.19 trillion worth of household wealth in Minnesota, and that in 10 years, so from 2020 to 2030, $61.1 billion was going to transfer from one generation to the next. Now, in the 2025 model, we see that household net worth, overall household net worth, is $3.1 trillion. And we're seeing that $105 billion is going to transfer from one generation to the next. And as was mentioned, this is a conservative analysis. And the wealth in Minnesota is growing at a greater rate than what we expected. Using the 2020 model, we estimated that $2.4 trillion was going to be the household net worth in 2025, and we're surpassing that greatly. And so again, we're going to stick with this conservative analysis because we don't want to overpromise and or overestimate. And so we're going to stick with this $3.1 trillion and 105 billion transferring in 10 years. So the idea is this 5% for grant making. So what would happen if 5% of this transfer of wealth were to be given to charities, nonprofits, community foundations? Well, 5% of that 105 is roughly $5.3 billion over the course of 10 years. And then take that 10-year time frame, and then the 20 years beyond that 10-year time frame, we'll see a grant making of nearly $6.3 billion. What should be noted about this is, again, this is the 20 years. So you have these donations to community foundations, to charities, to nonprofits, and they start accumulating wealth over 10 years. And what this estimates is after those 10 years, if these community foundations stop accepting this type of donation, you'll still see, with a 4.3% give back, $6.3 billion worth of grant making. That's without a single additional donation. This is what the kind of money that could potentially be available for nonprofits, for communities across Minnesota. I'm going to send it back to Ben, but the insights, the state has assets, many people have wealth. We can realize this wealth for our communities, and the time for planning is now. And our communities, frankly, could use these assets.
Yeah, thanks, Aiden. I see a question here from Nancy. These are real dollars in the year it was identified. So we do have some inflationary factors built in, but if we want to talk about details of the model, we can get into that a little bit. But I will just piggyback on what Aiden said here, that a lot of times, I don't want folks, especially in our small towns, to be distracted from the trillions. When in your town you may have millions. And those millions in our small towns mean huge things. It doesn't take much for our communities to have a conversation about the future of its community and to really get past raising money for the fish fry every year and having an endowment that pays for that fish fry every year kind of mentality, right? So again, we want to talk about the idea here, which is how do we build community wealth strategies? So on one side, it's how do we retain this wealth? Right? There's all this wealth that's going to transfer. Is it going to stay? Is it not? How do we be more explicit about actually trying to retain that? Sometimes you want to recapture wealth. Like, can we recapture some of this wealth that might have been lost in the past? How can we protect existing wealth that we've got? Land trusts work really good in this regard in terms of ensuring that the wealth that you've got in your community stays there and is generated and benefits those living in your community. And at the same time, creating and growing wealth for generations that never had an opportunity to grow wealth before. So for us, this is the starter. Groups like yours are the ones that have this conversation every day. We're just trying to provide some data around this number. And we provided this along with our partners at Locust to more than half the states in the country have done these transfer wealth studies. And Nebraska and Iowa have done a lot of work on this. Nebraska has the Five to Thrive program. They're over 20 years old, and they have set up an affiliate or a pass-through foundation in every county in the state, and they're encouraging local giving. And they set markers of trying to get 5% in every county. And they've got a statewide support structure behind it with this Five to Thrive initiative. In Iowa, tax credit. Iowa went another direction. They wanted to get a tax credit for folks that wanted to give because the tax credits that were there to encourage giving weren't enough. So Iowa went in two directions. They did this tax credit, and they also did a Five for the Future giving campaign. Just, everybody tends to pick on 5%. And why Jeff Yost at the Nebraska Community Foundation first said, let's try to capture 5%. And when folks asked him, like, why 5%? Like, is there research around that? He was like, no, it sounds reasonable. And when you look at the numbers, they are reasonable at a household level to have these conversations about giving to your local community. So with that, we are super excited to say we have a statewide campaign. The Minnesota State Chair and Minnesota Council on Foundations folks are here today. Jill and Michelle are here to talk about this program. We are very honored that we've got so much presence of mind across the state to think about this, to capitalize on this, and to continue this conversation with our friends across the field. So with that, we do have a website up here. Before I turn it off, we're going to get our updated reports for 2025 done, and then we're going to have every county done by the end of the year. So we're going to have all our new numbers by the end of the year, folks. If you have any interest or any questions around this, our emails will be attached to a lot of this information that we'll see followed up here too. So with that, Jill and Michelle, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. We're very excited about this partnership and really excited about the new data that you've brought forward and the new model. Again, hi everyone. I'm Michelle Tran-Marins. I'm the president of the Minnesota Council on Foundations, and I'm joined here by one of our team members, Jill Chi. And we just want to share with you a little bit more about taking this data and putting it into action to invest in our communities. So you all know about the Great Minnesota Get Together, the Minnesota State Fair. Our campaign is really centered on the Minnesota State Share. So again, even just 5% can really go a long ways, as you've seen the numbers, in terms of investing in our community. So our goals for today are really around providing some context around what this project is about, sharing the campaign, the Minnesota Great Share, State Share, and also the toolkit, the resources that we have for community foundations, nonprofits, and others who are interested in recapturing some of this transfer of wealth that's happening. And then also next steps for making it real. So just a little bit of context and history. For the last year, we've been working alongside community foundations and place-based funders, nonprofits, and individuals across the state to co-create a shared approach to what may be one of the most significant opportunities in Minnesota's philanthropic future. This transfer of wealth that you've just heard about, that's already beginning to reshape our state. So right now is the time to be planning. We know the numbers that Aiden and others just shared. $105 billion will be transferring over the next 10 years. And this isn't just about numbers. It's about legacy and helping Minnesotans give back to the communities that shape them, whether that's a rural township, a small city, a cabin up north, or a beloved neighborhood in the metro. So right now, we really have this opportunity. If even a small percentage of this transfer is directed toward philanthropy, it could create significant and long-term benefits for communities across the state. However, without intentional engagement and strategic messaging, much of this wealth may bypass local charitable giving, flowing instead into private inheritances or to financial institutions or causes outside of Minnesota. Before starting at MCF, I actually worked at the Women's Foundation of Minnesota, which is a community foundation. And it really is supported by people in the community making investments, whether that's through a donor advised fund or in other ways, because we know that in our communities, the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, the needs will change over time. And so a lot of times community foundations, nonprofits can pivot and really understand and direct those resources to where they're needed most in the community. So I'm going to turn it over to Jill, who will be stepping through a little bit more about the resources that we have for you today.
Thanks, Michelle, and hi, everyone. I am Jill Chi, the Member Engagement Manager with the Minnesota Council on Foundations. And as you can see, we need to update our slide with this new data, which we will be sure to do as soon as the report is officially available. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our role in educating our members and the philanthropic community about this transfer of wealth opportunity. So you can see here, this is an example of a presentation that we have been giving to some of our members in Greater Minnesota. This is some data that we pulled specifically for this Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation to share with their board just last week. And one of our first priorities is to really ground our members' understanding of what the transfer of wealth means for their particular service areas. So Extension has been so helpful in getting these numbers down to the regional and county level, which is really impactful for our members to see and understand. So we want them to understand how they can access these reports so they can make decisions about how to use it effectively in their programming over the next 10 years and beyond. So you can see that we really like to link to some of those resources for them, and also encourage you to visit the Extension website so you can see how this transfer of wealth is going to impact your local area. So I am going to talk a little bit more about the Minnesota State Share Toolkit. We develop these resources for both our members and beyond to help them understand how to communicate to their communities about this opportunity. So hold on just a minute. Let me make sure my links are working here. Moment of truth. Excellent. Okay. So this is the Minnesota State Share website.
Jill,
Oh yes,
we're
am I
still
not?
seeing, yeah, we're still seeing your presentation screen.
Let me see. Let's reset. How's it look now?
It looks good.
Good. We see the Minnesota State Share website.
Yes.
Wonderful. So this is the Minnesota State Share website. We developed this toolkit with the input and insights of donors, advisors, our community foundation leaders, and nonprofits over the last year. We released this toolkit in August of 2025. And when we present this to our members, we talk about how it can be tailored to the unique communities that they represent and their specific donor relationships. So we really want our members to lead with tangible tools and ideas and feel empowered by the collective impact that we can have when we align around this shared message, shared mission. So some of the tools that I would really like to share with you to start is this readiness guide and worksheet. This is applicable to both community foundation representatives, their nonprofit partners, and beyond in at the local level. And the goal here is to identify how ready our partners feel to get started on accepting diverse gifts. As you could see in the presentation that Ben just shared, one of the biggest areas of wealth holdings in the rural areas are in land. And some community foundations are really well versed in accepting those kind of gifts beyond cash. It can be anything from a few acres of land to holdings of grain to farm equipment, all of that great stuff. So this readiness guide can help our partners understand where they might need to bolster their understanding of how to accept these diverse gifts or understand where they can go if, for example, an advisor is speaking with a farmer who is interested in donating some grain holdings. We want that advisor to understand that the local community foundation knows how to accept a gift of that type and they can make that connection. So another tool that we like to share these fundraising event guides. We really like to get the word out to the community members who are going to be most impacted by this transfer of wealth. And our initiative foundations are really leading the way here. We already have the West Central Initiative Foundation who hosted a fundraising event just a few weeks ago. Ben, I believe you were in attendance there. And it was just a great opportunity for them to share some of these resources. They had printouts of some of the most up-to-date data, but we're going to have to update our materials with this new data so we can share at these events. As you can see, this is a guide that walks you through how to host one of these events, what some of the outcomes may be, and kind of the next steps after you make those connections at the event. There are some other really helpful tools here. We really encourage our members and partners to get the word out in their communities. And so we have some examples of public service announcements you can share on your local radio program. We have some social media posts that you can add your own branding to so you can spread the word that way. We try to make it as accessible as possible. And also as tailored as possible. These are just guides. Please feel free to put your own spin on the messaging. And one of our greatest resources for our community foundation partners are their board members. So we have this board member activation guide because their board members are representing just vastly diverse communities in and of themselves. They can be really strong ambassadors for this message and for getting the knowledge about this campaign into their own communities and making those connections so the people in their orbits know that they can go to their local community foundations for more information about how to access this opportunity. So you can see here, if you scroll to the top, there's also some different buttons you can click based on what you're representing. I'm a donor, I'm an advisor, I'm a foundation. So encourage you to take some time and explore these resources, and we'll be updating them shortly after we get the final report from Extension. And I think it's just going to be even more impactful than it already has been. So very exciting to see those numbers. So I'm going to try to get back to my PowerPoint here. All right, hopefully you are finally seeing the PowerPoint presentation. I see a thumbs up, great, thank you. So what's next? Get to know the data about how the transfer of wealth will impact your region. Explore the toolkit and make an activation plan for your team, board, and partners. Collect with local and statewide partners for support and collaboration. You don't have to go this alone. That's why we've developed this statewide campaign, so we can be sure that there's some alignment on messaging. And then share your story with MCF and with Extension so we can strengthen our storytelling and improve the toolkit. These on-the-ground stories are really helpful for us and also for others who are looking to start their own messaging campaigns around this data. So thank you, and I will turn it, I think, back over to Brandon now.
Yes, thank you so much, Jill and Michelle, and thank you, Aidan and Ben. So this is the opportunity to ask questions. There are a couple in the chat, but please feel free to also unmute and ask the questions directly of our presenters. So if you'd like to unmute, just raise your hand and we'll put you in the queue. And then also please drop any questions in the chat, and I'm going to add Ben and Aiden, everyone in there. So to kick us off, there was it was actually one of the last comments. And I thought it was a good question or a good comment, so I'll present it as a question. So Becky had said it also would be great to reach out to commissioners at the regional development commissions throughout the state. And can any of you speak to what the role of local governments and regional development organizations might be in playing to support the philanthropic capture of transfer of wealth?
Hey, this is Ben. Yeah, we do have a really rich network of RDCs across the state here, and initiative foundations. Just a lot. We were talking before we started about the extent to which we have a lot of different groups doing work, and doing engagement across the state. And so, on one hand, I don't know if Aiden has more engagement stories, but it really is for us about the engagement process that we want to go through with our communities. What does this look like when we walk hand in hand with them? So the data on one side, and I'll just reinforce, like the stories are vital for us as we walk through this, and it becomes positive succession stories that we share with folks. So, sorry, I don't have a really good answer for that question. Aiden, would you like to chime in?
Yeah. So I've done engagements across mostly southeastern Minnesota, and I think it needs to start from both directions. I like to talk with, so like for example, I gave a large presentation in Rice County to three different community foundations, one from um, Northfield, one from Faribault, and then one from I think two from Faribault. And so that's one way where it's like, let's talk to the foundations directly. Let's talk with the people or the organizations, they may be the ones receiving some of this money. But the other ways from the bottom up is like letting the people within communities know that there is wealth in this community and there is a method or there is like an ability to create positive change. And so it needs to start, I think, in both directions, where helping create an ecosystem where people can donate money, and as well as informing people that there is a tool for change and there is a way for them to positively impact their communities in the future. And so I think that's how this like the ideal way that this would go about. And so I do think uh commissioner like RDO commissioners um would be helpful, and that is one way to go about it. But I think it also starts from let's talk to community members.
Wonderful. And Michelle or Jill, did you want to add anything, or are you good?
Yes, I would just add a little story. This is more in progress, so still, being developed. But I do know that there are foundations, community foundations like Boreal Waters Community Foundation, for example, that's doing a lot of interesting projects in their region around affordable housing and working in partnership with government and philanthropy and nonprofits to create affordable housing for their community. So there are a lot of community foundations working very closely in partnership with the development commissioners in their region to make sure that their areas are developing in a way that they want to see for their community.
Thank you. I did get a question via chat, a private chat, and so this is for Ben and Aiden. Can you just speak a little bit about your population estimates and the projected growth and how much you're accounting for immigration and whether that is going to change based on the current policies around immigration?
Sure, I can touch on that. So we use this organization called Woods and Pool, and they're the nation like leaders in population growth estimates. I tried to read through their full like how they did it, and so what they use is they use like economic growth factors, historical like in by industry, historical population trends that follow or that are coincide with these economic growth factors. And I tried to read it all, but it was 600 pages, and so I wasn't quite able to read through all of it. So will be impacted so it does incorporate immigration. And because they're using economic indicators to help forecast migration and forecast population growth, there due to the changing economic landscape, there will be impacts to these projections. How exactly it will be impacted, I am not sure because again, I'm not the one doing the population projections.
Can you put that link to the organization you reference in the chat?
Yes, I can I'll do that right now.
And did you capture birth rate over the course of the 10 years that you're discussing by county?
We don't need to incorporate birth rate, we incorporate death rate. That becomes the primary focus of the model, is that
Really?
we use CDC number. Well, when we look at transfer of wealth, it ultimately is about people passing away. So as we look forward, the birth rate, that would be, 70 years out before the birth rate of today is impacting the transfer of wealth down the road, which is almost beyond the scope of our 40-year model right here. So
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep. I'll hit on the question we got in chat here about farmland and succession planning. And we do. Aiden and I, we were just looking this up this morning. In some counties, ag land is a primary vehicle of that property valuation increase. And, or might, a good 40% of the property valuation increase is because of agricultural land. Yes, agricultural land is being held in fewer hands. It's becoming more consolidated. What does that mean in terms of the data? What does that mean in terms of community? For us, it still comes back to the same with succession plan that you mentioned at the end of that note there about like what kind of transitions are we having? And so for us, that is the open door, a conversation about succession, about transition. What does that mean when we are actually trying to encourage people to have a positive narrative in their community that there is a group of people waiting in line, waiting to move into our small towns right here today. But we need to show a lot of times these folks that are older that there's a younger generation willing to make the same investments they made in their family, in the community, in their community. So now it becomes a conversation about continuity, succession planning, and really, are you willing to imbue your values of education or recreation or whatever it is in your giving for the next generation of people in your town? For me, the data just opens the door to the conversation at the household level with people about their intentions and about the future of their community.
And I would also, with more of these questions, I would reach out to the ag business team at U of M Extension. They'll be able to provide more like be able to answer some of these questions better than we will be able to.
I did receive
also,
another. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Jill.
I was just going to say, I can also share a little bit that the initiative foundations and the local community foundations have been thinking about this for a very long time, and many of them have set up mechanisms to help capture some of that transfer already. And so they have those relationships built in, and they know kind of who to work with in their local communities to start these conversations. So I think it's really a great idea to lean on those resources that the community foundations already have and support them as they try to use that infrastructure to work with the transfer of wealth in the coming years.
Great. Thank you. There was a question that was sent to me in private, and I'll drop the gist of it into the chat here. So having local community-minded financial planners available to those who are looking at planning for their own or for their long-term financial plan would be helpful. Do you all have a list at the Minnesota Council on Foundations related to financial planning?
We do not, but a lot of the initiative foundations and community foundations, again, have those relationships. And so we just, our role in this is to help everyone understand that those are going to be your experts to go to about actually taking action on the transfer of wealth. They are really building their muscles right now to be able to access this opportunity.
And related, is there anything on the toolkit? So this is another one that I got in private, different person, but is there a way to focus or something in the toolkit where you can best engage and message with professional advisors, such as estate planning attorneys and so forth? So is there anything in the toolkit that would be helpful for people looking to have these conversations locally?
Yes. So if you go on the Minnesota State Share website, there's a couple of different buttons depending on which side you're coming in on. Either I'm a donor or I'm an advisor, and we have some tools that are already prepared to start those conversations. I can also say we are working with our community foundation network to build these out a little bit more as we get some more stories shared with us about how these conversations are actually going and what might be useful in the future. So I can anticipate that there will be even more resources in the coming months related to those conversations and those relationships.
Wonderful. And we'll have links on our website with resources to everything that Jill shared and any additional information that they share with us afterwards. So this is a question from John Bartz. It appears much of the wealth transfer discussed today is highly illiquid. How does that affect the projections for the transfer of wealth and contributions to the two foundations? Likewise, I'm also reading that baby boomers are not transferring their wealth. Instead, they are spending it. Any data to support that?
Yeah, I'll just say I think yeah, obviously land can be illiquid, but it's liquid when it passes. The equity is certainly liquid. The wealth holding, the other components though as well certainly are fairly liquid too in terms of like retirement accounts. I have not seen that research. I've actually seen research the other way, that you've got a large proportion of people who when they retire or when they pass away may have holdings, 20 or 30% have holdings greater than when they retired because they overestimated the amount that they retired and underestimated or underestimated that side and overestimated their spending during that time. So it's kind of a bimodal, I think. Some people are working through all their assets and then they enter the medical field with no assets and get assistance that way. And on the other side, you've got folks who have those assets who persist through that as well. So I think those are kind of two different audiences. But I will say that land is, while the land itself is not liquid, the equity is.
Wonderful. And I think the other questions are related to, you kind of answered it, Jill, in some of the resources that were available. And so I don't know if there's anybody else who would like to either unmute and ask a question directly of our presenters. This would be the opportunity to do so.
I'll follow up just on the one question there about the projected population decline. Like maybe if things go the way they are in 2065, so 40 years from now would be the first time we're starting to hit that where births exceed deaths, but that's not always for a long period of time. That's when I die. I'm Gen X. I'm in between the huge baby boomers dying and the much bigger than baby boomers millennials. So yes, immigration portrays a part of this, but we're not Japan. I hear these arguments pretty consistently about the demographic cliff we're going off. We're not. I don't really see it. It's not in our data, even in this 40-year model. It is a slight dip until because Gen Xers are smaller, but then the millennials pass and they're even bigger. I mean, not that I'm celebrating that. I'm just saying like they're a big group, right? The baby boomers are huge, and then me, and then millennials. So I hear that. We don't really see it. It's projected outward and it's so far out, it's outside the limits of our model even right now. So
And additionally, the Woodson pool, the data that we use is an exceedingly complex model that they're using to project population growth, and they do measure migration from other states, from out of the country, from neighboring counties, and so they're trying to forecast all these very minute details. And so while birth rates do play a part of it, they're also seeing they're also measuring like quality of life changes may impact migration, and they're measuring all these very minute details to see where migration is going. So,
So what you're really pointing out are there are multiple variables that could have impact on this particular projection that you're making. So one of the things when you talk about wealth transfer, well, there's wealth transfer in the traditional, let's just say the biblical sense that you're talking about, that happens at the end of life, near the end of life. But people may be making discussions about how to transfer their wealth into funds, for example, that are going to produce X, Y, and Z for a particular community. That is something, if you look at Portland Family of Funds, that was something that went on a few years ago. So at what point in the aging process, 55, 65, 75, do you say, hey, I think I want to put my money into this particular fund because that's going to perpetuate this particular thing in my small town. And I think we have to be cognizant of there are other variables going on, which is why I raised the birth rate. Because my grandchildren, I want them to be exposed to some things that I'm excited about now, and I'm not sure I want to wait until I croak to see that happen. So, and maybe our good friends over at Thrive It and some other places can put this in here, but I do think we need to talk about what are the social innovations that will could take away from this projection. In other words, or could at least be alongside that projection that we need to be cognizant of in places like Crookston, which is one of my favorite places. They're good people up there. So I just wanted to put that in there in the mix. That's all.
Wonderful. And
that's
I'd
great.
like
Thank you,
to
Brandon. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to make sure to be respectful of everyone's time. So thank you, Anthony, for that comment. And thank you, Jill and Michelle and Aiden and Ben for sharing with us today. And thanks everyone for joining us. There will be a follow-up email probably in about a week or so that will have access to the video, the recording, the PowerPoint slides, and any resources that are available. And if you're interested in future webinars, you can look here. We will post those every so often, and we'll send out mailers as well. But with that, thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.